Hello everyone, welcome to Hometown Heroes. I'm Mike Kenichi, and tonight is part 2 of our interview with the great Ron Luneau. And Coach, I want to thank you for coming on again. You know, I can't say enough good things about you. Part 1 was awesome. I'm sure part 2 is going to be even better. Thank you again for coming on.
Thanks again, Mike, for having me. I appreciate it. And I'm almost embarrassed because great. I've never heard anybody say that word associated with my name. So thanks for the build-up, Mike.
So, Coach, let me ask you this. 2000, you leave Southern in 2001, I believe. You spend a season with Coach Ken Roberts at Newtown. Talk about that 1 year at Newtown, because you've always spoke fondly about the 1 year you were there. You got to coach with Coach Roberts, I believe Brad Piccirillo, Tony Branca, and all those guys. Talk about that for 1 year at Newtown.
Well, again, I was coaching with a bunch of great guys, and I had a good relationship with all the coaches there. The kids were nice kids. They were excellent kids.
Right.
And to me, it was just one of those things where it was a nice change up from going to college to high school. I think since then, the Newtown program has become the dominant program, I know since then, in the SWC. At that time, we were one of the better programs as well. Again, it was a good place to coach. It wasn't as blue-collar as I would have liked it to have been. There was never, a lot of the kids there, they were the best kids in the world, but I wanted to work with kids who were more, if you want to call it, more needy and needed a little bit more, like I said before, kids who were underdogs.
Right.
And that's what spurred me to go back to Derby the following year. Again, because we know that socioeconomics plays into a lot of different things. But I have nothing but good things to say about the time I was at Newtown. Coach Roberts was an excellent defensive coach, and the program was run the right way.
Right.
And those guys did everything that they could do to try to win games, just like most coaches try to do.
Right. So now the 2003 season comes. Coach Oko steps aside and you replace him as head coach, which I always thought when I was in high school that was the plan all along. But it wasn't always, a definite, things change. You went to Southern, you went to Newtown. Talk about, it was for one season, but talk about coming back to Derby as a head coach. Did you see different changes from the time you were an assistant? You'd been gone, I think, 4 years. So.
Yeah. I think just like I said, there was a slow change. We still had a lot of tough kids. We still had a lot of good kids.
Right.
But I also think that I started seeing where, the school, the town was starting to change. And I knew playing the schedule that we had, it would be very difficult. Okay.
Right.
That by that point in the 03 season, I don't know whether or not being in the SEC with the schedule that we had, having Shelton, Ansonia, Amity, Cheshire, Xavier, Prep, Hill House.
Right.
I don't know if that was conducive for our time at Derby at that time. So I knew it was going to be tough. And unfortunately, it turned out, the year started off great. We win our first game 32-0 against Wolcott.
Right.
And then we come up against one of the better Ansonia teams of all time, and they put a licking on us. So again, and I just think that, I do think, though, that the 3-8 record that we had was probably what we should have been. Okay,
right.
Because the 8 teams that beat us were certainly better than us.
Right.
Okay, and in some cases, I would say 6 of those 8 schools were much better than us.
Right, and you really hung with Shelton for a while. I really felt if you guys could have got in on that 5-yard line, that could have been a different game, because they had just taken the lead, and then one of your players, I forget who it was, ran the kickoff back, brought it all the way to about the 15-yard line.
David D'Agostino.
Right, great player.
Yeah.
So that always seemed to be the problem in Derby, though. Derby would always have bad luck. You look at the great teams, and they always seem to catch the breaks, and then a team that could use the break always seemed to fall short. But that team always tried to be competitive. They left it all on the field, and I think they played as well as they possibly could.
Yeah, I thought they gave us a great effort that year, and again, I think that a lot of teams make their own luck as well. So we need to make our own luck, and I think that if we could have gotten a ball in then, it would have been a lot more difficult for Shelton, who would go on to win the Class L playoffs that year. I remember we called a handback bootleg, in which we tossed the ball out of a wishbone,
Right.
and then he handed it back to the quarterback who would bootleg out and then have the choice to throw it to the tight end who would block and release.
Right.
And the ball got tipped away by one of Shelton's outside linebackers.
Right.
And again, I think that had we executed that, we could have given them a lot more problems in the second half.
Right. So now you don't coach for a year. I think the 2004 season you took the year off, but you came back to baseball in the spring of that year and you helped out Emmett O'Brien. And for a lot of that season, you kind of had to run things. You know, Coach Heider had a job where it was causing him not to be able to be at practice. Talk about that 1 year at Emmett, because that was a very good team. I think they won the division that year. Talk about that team a little bit.
Well, that was another team, again, the opposite of Derby. For the schedule that they had better players than most of the other tech school teams. We had a kid named Chris Smith who would go on to play at University of New Haven. We had a couple other kids. We had basically kids from Naugatuck and Shelton who might not have been good enough to make the Shelton or Naugatuck teams, but were certainly good enough to be on our team. So we had a lot of talent. Robbie allowed me to coach with him, and it was a great experience. Robbie already had won a couple of league titles, and he had a nice little program going, and he just let me come in and bring my ideas as well. And we just, again, that was a situation where I thought we were better than most of the teams that we were playing, and we ended up winning the league championship, which was a great year. I want to say our overall record was like 17-5 when all was said and done. And again, it was just a year where those kids worked hard. They got it, and they were also talented, again, compared to the league that we were in. We did run into trouble when we played Fairfield Ludlow in the States. Again, Fairfield Ludlow, an FCAC team. Again, we kind of met our match after that.
Right. So now back to football. 2005, you move over to Wilbur Cross, and you're coaching with some characters, you know, and I felt like that staff had a bunch of characters because they were intense coaches, but they were also, you know, coaches that the kids would really, you know, laugh at, and they would do funny things. You had Dennis Wanzi, the head coach. You had Mark Kovacs, who was an assistant. Talk about your 1 year at Wilbur Cross, and it was a very good team that year.
Yeah, that was, at that time, it was Cross's first winning team in
about 8 years.
I'm going to say, no, it might have been a little longer. I'm going to say maybe 14 years since they had a kid named Bruler at quarterback in 91.
Right.
So anyway, that was a great experience. The kids were awesome. And again, talk about working with underdogs. Those kids were a pleasure to work with. They were tough. They were physical.
Right.
They were yes sir, no sir type kids. They were just great kids. Coach Wanzi was perfect for those kids. Absolutely a character.
Right.
Dennis Wanzi's character, Mark Kovacs. And I would say, they would say the same thing about me. I was a character there too as well. We also were blessed with a guy that played for me at Southern, would come on to be the defensive coordinator, which a lot of people did not know at that time. His name was Howard Jones.
Oh, okay.
And Howard Jones, to me, was one of the best young coaches to come up in a long time. I think now he's involved in the sports agent industry. But at that time, he was in his early 20s, and he was calling a high school defense. He was one of the smartest, youngest, best minds that I thought at that time were coming up. That was a great experience, and that would really pave the way for me to go into West Haven, you know.
Right. And, you know, Coach, it's one thing to be a coach and not care about your profession. You know, most do, but there are the exceptions who, you know, don't, you know, serve the kids like they should. 2006, I don't think you knew at the time it was going to be your last year at Derby as a teacher, but midway through the year, the kids decided to dedicate the yearbook to you in 2006. It would be your final time there at Derby, final season. Talk to me about that, because while it's great to have all these coaching accolades and, you know, wing games and stuff like that, as a teacher, an educator, a professional, that had to just, you know, you had to feel touched by the fact that they dedicated the yearbook to you.
I really appreciated that, because those kids were a very special class to me. I still have the yearbook. I still look back. About once every 6 months, I'll open it up and look at it. I still see those kids, those students around town who are now right around the age of 29 or 30. Actually have seen them at Bar None and Archie Moore's and various establishments around the place. So it's really, I mean, it's great to see those girls and guys, and they were excellent. But it was... The problem at Derby was never the kids. the kids to me were so special and so important. And I think that they knew that also I was a very serious teacher and that I love teaching.
Right.
And it's probably as much a passion for me as a teacher as it is as a coach,
Right.
if not more. You know, because I'm an avid reader. I read every night 20 to 50 pages, depending on if I could stay awake.
Right.
That's how I end my night. And that meant a lot to me. That meant a lot, getting that award. And again, guys like you that I had, I mean, I've always thought that I had good relationships with my students. And I think that it was beyond sports. It was always about the school community and teaching.
Right. So now when you left Derby, I think you went to Kaner Tech for a little while. I mean, again, you left Derby, you wanted to advance and do, go to another school. But I mean, you graduated there, you taught there for 14 years. Was there a bit of sadness to you, leaving there? I mean, it had to be a little sadness, correct?
Yeah, I particularly didn't like the direction the school was going in. I didn't like the direction that school was going in. I didn't like a lot of the leadership. When Mr. DeCenzo had decided to leave and a few of my colleagues had left, I didn't like the direction that Derby High School was going in. And I clearly didn't like the direction of how the Board of Education was running things and how the school leadership was running things. And I don't think that the people that came in truly understood Derby like we did.
Right.
And that to me was a big role. I really wanted to leave Derby at that moment. And I don't really regret it. I really don't regret it. It was a different town than the town I grew up in, and then it's the town in the first 10 years that I was teaching in. And I think that, honestly, that started a decline in the integrity and honor of that school, was when guys like Mr. DeCenzo and Mr. DeFrancisco and a lot of what I call the old regime left.
Right. So 2006, you move over to Woodland as a coach for football. You coach with Chris Anderson now. Chris is as intense as they come, but a terrific coach. I mean, what he did at Woodland in the 7 years he was there was remarkable. Mm-hmm. 2 state titles, 2 MVL titles. Talk about the 1 year you coached with Coach Anderson. It had to be very enjoyable for you.
Unbelievable. Chris is an unbelievable coach, organizer. I believe he's a college coach. I've always said that to him from Jump Street, and he is. He turned out to be a college coach. Treated me with the utmost respect. Treated his staff with the utmost respect. Real professional coach. Again, a friend of mine, a good friend of mine. And I remember Chris as a younger kid growing up in Derby behind me, and again, an underdog that made it. And he was the right choice at the right time for Woodland, and it was another great experience. I mean, their coaches were very good. Timmy Phipps, Timmy Shea. Right. We had a good coaching staff. We had good players, very dedicated players, very dedicated. And I think it was a mark of their coach working hard and the players working hard as well.
Right. And, I think you guys had a good year that year. I think you went 7-3. It was a young team. They had just come off 2 state titles, so it was going to be a young team, but they still competed. They still played hard. So, that first year, just, interacting with the kids had to be a great time for you.
Great time.
Right. Before we get to West Haven, you've done a lot with baseball, and I think you implemented a thing called triple play.
I got to mention, too, one of my buddies, Robbie Didato, on that staff as well. Robbie was an excellent defensive backs coach at that time. I didn't want to forget Robbie.
Right. But I think you implemented a program called Triple Play. You were doing that with John D. I think Steve Riley even would come on Sundays with you, a bunch of guys. Talk about the Triple Play. I think it was Ripken, the Cal
Ripken Baseball, yeah.
Ripken Baseball, yes.
It was an initiative through Cal Ripken's organization that I was lucky enough to be able to. I was picked by Mike Catella at the Boys and Girls Club in Shelton to lead it. And
another great guy.
Again, great for the Valley. Mike Catella. Another guy in the Valley that has done so much for kids,
Right.
And being a baseball coach, he picked me to lead the initiative, and it was basically money provided through the Cal Ripken organization to bring baseball into urban areas. And again, as the Valley started to change and become more urban,
right,
as well as it was available for Bridgeport kids to come up, we were able to provide baseball clinics in the wintertime at the Boys and Girls Club twice a week.
Right.
And it was just a great experience, and I think a lot of kids got a lot out of it. It's just like anything else. If you have the support of different groups, you can make things happen with kids, especially a sport like baseball, where, to me, I think we've lost. Baseball, to me, has become a suburban sport now. And I think that if you went back to years ago in New York City when they would play stickball, I don't know if that's happening as much anymore as it could be with all of the computers and the video games and all that stuff that has come out.
Let me ask you this, though, Coach. So many of these young pitchers in Major League Baseball especially are blowing their arms out. There's been so many Tommy John surgeries. Why do you think these pitchers are having so many issues with their arms? One of the things I think, and you tell me if you agree or disagree, is I think sometimes there's too much emphasis on playing baseball year-round, and I don't think a kid should be pitching year-round.
Yes, I agree 100%. Again, back when we were growing up, there was a lot more 2- and 3-sport athletes, so you naturally gave your arm a break. Even if you were a quarterback in football, it's a little bit different throwing motion. It's a little bit different way of throwing. I think that and I think that tests will show, and I read a report a few years back from a Dr. Andrews out of, I think, Alabama or Florida. He's one of the big NFL orthopedics.
Dr. James Andrews.
Yes. He specifically said one of the problems is the year-round throwing, okay, of arms in baseball. And I do not believe, even as a baseball coach, I don't believe in year-round baseball. I would like to see my kids partake in other sports, not only to give their bodies a rest from a different motion, or also a mental break from the sport, okay? Right. I don't think dedicating yourself to one sport is truly making you a well-rounded athlete.
Right. Now let me ask you this. You're voting for the Hall of Fame. Does Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, and Alex Rodriguez get your vote?
I'm only concerned about what they did on the field. All of those guys have issues off the field. Okay, right. Had issues, whatever. They were definitely among the three greatest players of all time. Bonds, to me, was unbelievable. Right. Clemens was great. A-Rod was great. They would have my vote.
Right.
Okay, but again, I'm not one of the writers, and I'm not one of the people sitting at Cooperstown. So to me, I think that, and they also grew up in a time or came about in the last 20 years where they were under a lot more scrutiny than the old timers like Mickey Mantle and Billy Martin and Jackie Robinson. A lot of those guys, Bob Gibson and right. Yogi Berra and Babe Ruth, yeah. They all had their issues and indiscretions as well, but they just weren't as publicized as all of our others.
When I look at the whole steroid era, I think you have to look at, though, did they make an average player great, and did they make a great player out of this world? And I think that's what happened with those three. They were great, and it just put them at a whole new level. I think what happened with Bonds, he saw McGwire breaking those home run records, and he wanted in with that. He didn't need to do it. But I look at a player like Mark McGwire, and to me, he's one-dimensional. He's a home run hitter. He was not a great first baseman. He was not a good average hitter. You could look at a guy like, Rafael Palmeiro. I think he could hit for average, but I don't know if he could hit home runs without the steroids. But those three, to me, they were good. They were great without this stuff. I mean, what do you think about that?
I think it's like anything else. I think that the need to make money, the need to be competitive, the need to be great, they're looking for an edge. And whatever edge they can get over the next guy is what they're going to do. And again, a lot of those guys have indiscrepancies that I think that they wish they could call back, and they could fall back and say, I wish I never did any of that stuff. I do think that they're humans. They made mistakes. I do think that, again, if you ask them if they could go back in time, would they change some things? They probably would say yes. Right? Same as Pete Rose. Again, I'm looking at him as a player. He was a fabulous player to watch. Egotistical man, selfish guy, looking at himself always. And again, I think if he went back in time, he would regret some of the things that he's done.
Right. So now let's get to the West Haven years. I think 2008 you started teaching there full time. You came back to coaching football. I think you were the defensive coordinator. Talk about going to West Haven. You're coaching for a legendary coach, a guy who was successful at St. Joe's as well as West Haven, and Eddie McCarthy. Talk about that experience.
Great move on my part to find a community, a school that like West Haven. Again, a lot of blue collar kids, a lot of
Right.
parents who are blue collar, good people, solid people. The community's great there. The kids are great there. I think it's been, for the last 9 years that I've been there, it's been a pretty good match, and I'm lucky to have a superintendent and a board of ed that's very supportive. Coach McCarthy was unbelievable. I mean, I've had so many fun moments coaching
Right.
with him. He is a funny guy. He's an excellent football coach. He's a great game coach, game time coach, and I also think he's a great motivator. I think, again, his pregame speeches are among the best that I've ever heard, and he won 329 games, whatever he did, for a reason. We're also blessed at West Haven, and he was blessed, and I'm blessed, and we've all been blessed in that town. There's a lot of great athletes, a lot of
Right.
wonderful players in that community.
Right. And just talk about, let me ask you this. Do you still enjoy teaching as much as you did, say, 1992? Because a lot has changed. I mean, the kids have so much access to stuff, cell phones, you name it. And I feel like a lot of kids, are looking at their phones a lot. It's just the nature of the beast. But do you still enjoy teaching as much as you did back then?
I still love teaching. I still love it. I mean, over the summer, I took courses at Columbia University.
Right.
I'm involved in a Civil War Preservation Trust. I think that as long as I want to learn more, I can always bring it and pass it on to the kids. I do think it's a little bit more difficult now at the high school level, but I think the high school kids today are not as mature as they were 10 years ago, as they were 20 years ago, et cetera, et cetera. And then I also found that I also get a new rise out of teaching. For the last 3 years, I've been teaching at Gateway Community College, and that has given me another opportunity to meet students who are very good, very hungry, and I think that teaching is like anything else. It's a lifelong learning process, and if you want to pass it down to your kids, you pass it down to your kids. But I do think that high schools today, I do think we baby our kids a little bit too much. Our expectations, even though academically they're higher, we don't. We give them quite a bit of chances,
Right.
and we should be making them a little bit more accountable and more responsible. But I think that society gives them a lot more breaks than we used to get as kids.
Right. Explain the difference between Ron Luneau being a teacher in the 90s to being a teacher in the 2000s now. I mean, what have you changed, if anything, about your teaching?
I think I'm a lot more relaxed now. I think I think I'm a better teacher now than I was 20 or 25 years ago. I think that I become good at bringing materials into the classroom again, and just building upon the resume of, instead of having 30 or 40 stories, I have 80 or 90 stories now
Right.
that I can bring into my history classroom. And I think that again, I hope that I still have the same passion when I'm ready to retire in 12 or 13 years as I do right now.
Right. Now, I want to ask you about this person. I know you've had a long relationship with him, and he's been a big influence on you. Talk to me a little bit about Charlie DeCenzo.
Charlie DeCenzo, to me, is a second father. Okay, there are four people that every time I made a career move, or a life move, I've always contacted him, and he's one of them.
Right.
Charlie DeCenzo, Tom Fay, one of my good friends, Sal Coppola, and another good friend from Meriden, Ed Grady. Okay,
Right.
we call him Shady Grady in my house. Those four guys I've always checked in with because they've always acted as mentors at one time or another. To me, Charlie is the classiest guy that I know. He's a gentleman. He was a great football coach, great leader, principal of our school. And I really think that when he left Derby in 06, 05 or 06, that the town of Derby really felt it. And I don't think that enough people at the time enough people really came to his defense either. Again, that's how the community has changed. I think that again, Charlie was he was Derby. Charlie
Right.
was Derby, and I think that the town has still not replaced that image. Might not ever be able to replace it. Although I think the new principal and the new athletic directors and the people up there right now seem to be very, very nice people who are trying to bring back some of the good times that were there.
Right. And you know what's crazy about Charlie is up until this year, he was still teaching. He was teaching at Fairfield Prep. He was still coaching. I mean, the guy just loves teaching and coaching. You know, if he had it his way, he would do it until, you know, the
Yes.
day he died. I mean, he really has a passion for both.
Yeah, he's an excellent coach, excellent teacher. The highlight of my Thanksgiving Day game this year was while we were playing prep. I heard him call my name from the end zone when I was warming up with the defensive lineman, and I saw him over there. And sorry to all the prep fans, but he was sitting on our side, on the West Haven side during that game. And I think, I can't speak for him, but I think he was rooting for my team.
Right.
Because it was my team. And again, I think that again, I was his first captain. I love Charlie DeCenzo, and I think that again that he'll go down. I think he's in the next class of Hall of Fame for
Yes.
Derby's Hall
Yep.
of Fame. Again, when I think of Derby, I always thought of Charlie DeCenzo as being, you know, when you think of certain things, when you think of the New York Yankees, I think you think of Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig and Mickey Mantle, and when I think of Derby, I think of Charlie DeCenzo and Lou DeFlippo and other of the greater people been involved with that program.
Right. As a coach and as a teacher, you could answer it both. Who are some of the players that stand out to you that you've coached over the years, and students for that matter?
I mentioned Davian Roman.
Right.
I mentioned one of my favorite as a head coach, baseball coach. You know, there's so many good ones, and I feel really, really bad if I don't want to mention too many because I don't want to leave out anybody.
Right.
But I think George French, the current Derby coach, is one that, you know, again, he played for me in all three sports.
Right.
Was an unbelievable hustler, okay? And so many of those guys on those years, on those teams, and I just don't want to get into mentioning all of them because
Right.
I don't want to forget many people, you know? So again, I mentioned Ann Roman, I mentioned George French, and I'll say this, I've been lucky at West Haven, a kid named Irvin Phillips, okay? He's up at Syracuse right now. Another kid, Dwayne Gary. Those were two of the best kids to ever come through. As students, I had a kid named Brian Flaherty at Derby
Yes,
High School.
very smart kid.
Went to Yale. Diane Paquet
Right.
went to Yale. Just so many good students so many good kids in the classroom. The SACU girls,
Right.
Lauren and Marcia, and just so many of them as well did such great jobs in the classroom as well.
Right. So now you finished your second season as baseball coach at West Haven, head coach. Did you ever think when you stepped down in 2003 from coaching baseball with Derby that you would ever be a head coach again in baseball?
You know what? Being a head coach doesn't really matter to me. I mean, I'm glad, but I was content. I was working for a great guy, Mike Anquilleri,
Right.
at Derby at West Haven High School. Mike Anquilleri was a great high school baseball coach, and I was lucky enough to be his JV coach. And he himself too is a very professional and classy guy, and that's why I don't know why he picked me to succeed him. But he honestly did the right thing. He went to his top assistant first, John Ascenzia, and John said basically, I want to see my kid play in college. His son was a great player at University. And then he went down the ladder and he asked me, and I said, I think I'm still young enough. I'd like to do it. And then, I brought back John Ascenzia the following year, and it's pretty much the same program as it was. I try to do things as much like Coach Anquilleri that he did. Again, the town has changed a lot. West Haven was a dominant baseball school in the 80s into the 90s. And in the last 15 or 20 years, much like Derby, the town has changed a little bit too in West Haven as well.
Right. I'm going to throw a couple names at you. You tell me what you think about them. I'll start with Coach George DeMayo.
Great for high school football. Great personality, great character.
John D. Francisco.
One of the bigger than life characters you'll ever meet. Just a funny guy, a very good baseball coach, a good person.
Jack Cochran.
One of the best coaches I've ever seen. And again, a guy who's human and has plenty of indiscretions, like myself and others who have been there.
Joe Lisa.
Joe Lee's, I think, the best hitter that I've seen at Derby High School.
Right.
And again, one of the better baseball players that I've seen come through Derby High School.
Right. Joe Borzelli.
Great man, very good leader, good head coach, professional person.
Right. Let me ask you, Coach, what is the biggest thing that you've gotten out of teaching? If you could think of one thing, what has been the most rewarding thing to you?
I think the most important thing is the relationships that you have with your other coaches and the players that played for you.
Right.
I'd like to think that most of my former players enjoyed the time that they spent with me like I enjoyed spending time with them. And I do have one thing that I like to say, and I've lived with this motto since I was at Derby and now at West Haven, that the one thing I'll always say is that when a kid plays for me for 4 years and they give their heart and soul, that you owe them one thing, that you owe them a chance if they need help in the future, whether it be a job or getting into college or doing something like that. I believe that the coach owes that kid at least phone calls and communications to help that kid succeed after high school.
Right, exactly. You know, in 2016, I believe January of 2016, you received one of the highest honors I think a person could. You were inducted into the Boys and Girls Club Hall of Fame. First off, talk about what you felt like when you got that call and just talk about everything leading up to it. And you had quite the speech. It was one of the best speeches I heard, you know, very entertaining.
Yeah, well, I don't think I'll ever be in any other Hall of Fame in my life, okay? So, again, it's the one Hall of Fame that I think I always had a shot to be in. It was an honor because the Boys and Girls Club was a big part of my life growing up.
Right.
Again, in the Valley, I was one of those underdogs. You know, you're just a kid who's growing up more or less on the streets, but you're playing ball all over the place, and you're playing in downtown Derby, downtown Shelton, and it's just a great hangout place for kids, and it gives you structure, and it gives you a place to do something in a positive way. And to me, the Boys Club was great like that. So when I was able to get back working at the Boys Club and helping out kids, I think it was great. And Mike Catella, to me, again, one of the greatest people to come out of the Valley with helping kids out.
Right.
And it was just a great experience. I think my speech was funny because, again, I grew up like a lot of other kids in the Valley.
Right.
It was quite common when I was in high school to get into fist fights at McDonald's
Right.
or at the Boys Club or even outside of school. So to me, one of those things back then was, again, it was part of the growing process that it helped you get through those tough years, and then
Right.
and hopefully you get molded into a good human being later on.
And as a kid going to the club, who were the counselors that you kind of looked up to? I mean, did you have Dennis O'Connell at that point?
Dennis would turn out to be a good friend of mine. Dennis was a younger guy right out of college when I was there. Mike Catella was. Jack Rebus was one of my counselors. And
Right.
another guy who put a lot of time into the Valley and did a lot of great things. I remember all of those guys. You know, I remember the first time Jack made me box when I was 4 years old. He pitted me against a 6-year-old kid. And I remember just seeing like a flash. And I remember just looking up and I saw the ceiling. So I knew
Right.
that I had been in my first fight and I had got beaten my first time. Okay, so again, it was one of those things where, again, it's just a great place to grow up at as a young kid.
And I think that's why a lot of the Derby Shelton kids kind of got along, because they kind of went to the club together. I think that helped because it was a Derby Shelton club. Now it's kind of expanded into the lower Naugatuck Valley.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, it was a lot different when you were a kid going there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was mostly Derby and Shelton kids, a sprinkling of Ansonia kids, and I think now with the satellite club in Ansonia, you get a lot more of those kids involved, which is good because, again, the purpose of the Boys Club is to be for all kids. And to me, they've the best thing they did too, and I think it was under Jack's and Mike's leadership, is spread out to serve the whole valley. You know, which again, look at Connecticut, it's a real blue collar place. A lot of Connecticut has a wealthier component to it, and those our kids need a place to call home and to have extracurricular activities and to have programs for them.
Right. And I think any Hall of Fame you get into, when you get that call, and whether you're expecting it or you're not, is a tremendous feeling. But talk to me about when you received the call that you were told you were getting into the Boys and Girls Club Hall of Fame. What was your feeling, reaction?
I was happy because,
Right.
again, I think it was Jimmy Queen who called me
Right.
and told me the news. And, of course, I was happy. I was honored. And, and I know that I guess I'm one of the semi-successful people that came out of that club. And there's so many great people that came out of that club. So to me, it's one of those things where it was an honor, and it's just a good feeling that you get, and it was even a better feeling when I made my funny speech, and I said I was getting in, I thought I was getting into the Boxing Hall of Fame, and it was really the Boys Club Hall of Fame, and to me, it's just one of those things. Again, it's part of a life that to me is just a good thing. It's just a great memories of great people.
Right. And I think, of course, you've coached forever, you were a player and stuff like that. And of course, it's a great feeling if that day ever came for you to be called upon, whether it was Coach of the Year or Hall of Fame, whatever. But I think the fact that you got in for being a good person, I think really had to make you feel great, because I think that's how you would want, if you were going to be in a Hall of Fame, it would be for being a good person.
Yeah, I'd like to think that I've treated a lot of people. I think it's reciprocal. I've gotten a lot of good things from people, and I've given a lot of good things to people. And I think that that's how people work. We're supposed to help each other out in life, because, especially now that I just turned 50 this year, I think that you find out that life is too short, and you want to make the most out of it. And I think that that's part of it. That's what we're supposed to do as human beings, is helping each other out. And to me. Again, I just think that that's part of why we're here.
Right. Did you ever think, as an educator, taking it to the next step, like maybe being a guidance counselor or principal, were there ever, thoughts of doing that at all?
I'm still thinking, because I still have 12 or 13 more years to go. I think I could get my licensure for principal, and I think I have 3 classes already under my belt, so I need another 3 or 4 classes to go. But again, I think I'm where I belong with teaching, all right?
Right.
I think I would have been a good guidance counselor, because I'm into the college scene, and I like bringing kids into college. But again, I just think that for now, and again, when you coach, and you coach the way that I do, I really go hard at it. It's hard to fit that extra schooling in, after a while. So to me, I'd have to give up something to get something.
Right. Football has changed a lot over the years, as you know. One of the things I hate as, a guy who grew up watching Derby football and just watching high school football is, number one, I always believe if your colors are red and white, it's red and white. If your colors are black and white, whatever. Now everybody's wearing the red pants, wearing the black pants, the blue pants, stuff like that. That's one of the changes. The other thing that's changed a lot, though, is they've put a lot of restrictions on, what you can do in practice and stuff. I think if you have a bye week, you can't even be in pads for that whole week. Let me ask you, do you like how they've changed certain things about high school football, or do you think it's unnecessary?
I think, again, some of the changes are good, and some of them are not so good. I don't like the direction that the game itself is going in. It's in a lot of cases, it's a lot like flag football. We spread out the field and we throw the ball.
So you're not a fan of the spreads?
I'm not a fan of the spread offenses,
right.
No. But they're also very hard to defend, and there is a game to be won, so there's a lot of teams that perfect that spread offense, I do feel this, though. I feel that if you limit hitting, as long as there's a plan to do it, that's fine, all right? Because I think the game of football is a great game. I think it's just a game. I never want to lose it in this country. I think it's a great game to play. I think it's a very exciting game to play. But I do believe in making it safer for the players. So if you have a plan to make it safer, fine. I also believe that kids should not be hitting below middle school. So I'm sorry for the Pop Warner people that are out there and everybody else, but I think that below, let's say 12 years old, kids should be playing flag football.
That's a great league they have in Shelton, and I know they have it other places, but the Shelton one, which I'm familiar with, that is a great thing they do for kids.
Yeah. I don't think young kids need to be racking their brains and getting multiple breaks in their arms or legs or dealing with ACL surgeries. I think that, again, if we could limit contact at a young age, so then when they get to high school, I know, Mike, that when you played at Derby, we had quite a few players that had 6 or 7 years of Pop Warner under their belt they were almost burnt out by the time they got to high school.
Right.
So again, I'm a fan of letting kids hit probably around the age of 13 or 14, and because I don't think there's a need for it at a younger age.
Now let me ask you, do you think the turf has something to do with a lot of these concussions, or do you think that's just a myth?
I think it's just a myth.
Right.
I think there's always the reason that there's more concussions is they're getting diagnosed more.
Right.
I would probably venture to say that I've had quite a few concussions in my career that did not get diagnosed, and so I think now there's a lot of awareness. I think that we've gone the other way, like everything else in America. There's drama, and so I do think that right away people immediately start saying, "Oh my God, they have a concussion," before they even get diagnosed as a concussion. You know?
Right. Yeah, it's definitely changed. I mean, do you prefer turf or grass? Which one do you like?
I'm an old-fashioned guy, so I like grass that's well kept. But again, if we could play at a place like the Yale Bowl all the time, that would be the ultimate. Okay, but I realize that most high schools, I think that for the budgets that schools have, the right way to go now is for that turf to be put on, that field turf.
Right. Exactly. You know, I think, do you like the whole playoff format? I think it's too long, in my opinion. I think playing 3 games to win a state title after you've played a grueling 10 or 11 game schedule is just a lot to ask out of a kid. You're basically not finishing until, the second week of December. I mean, do you think the playoffs are a little too much sometimes?
I think right now it's as good as it could be. I think it hurt us. I think we had a very good team this year, and I think that after a very physical Thanksgiving Day game against Prep on a Thursday, to come back on a Tuesday and play Ridgefield, who's a very good team, I think that it hurt us. We had 2 or 3 big injuries coming out of that Prep game, and I think that 4 or 5 days in between was not enough for us to heal. And so I think that it's rushed. The playoffs are rushed.
Right.
But again, that's what we've adopted, so we've got to get used to that. And again, I don't think every team in the state of Connecticut played 10 games like we played. Okay, I think that we played, out of our 10 games, we played 7 nail biters, 7 pretty rough games, and then topped it off with Thanksgiving and going into another rough game in the playoffs. So again, I think that every school has a different situation, but I don't like the rushed content right now.
Is it impossible with the schedule you guys play for any SEC team to play that whole schedule and to go undefeated? And I'm talking playoffs too. At some point, do you think it catches up with the team?
Well, I think this year, it caught up to us and Shelton a little bit.
Right.
And again, the team that came out of it looking great was Hill House. They won a Class M championship, and I think it was a good schedule for them because they played some very difficult games that they had to win, and they won.
Right.
And they had some games that they were, I think their starters were rested as well. And then they proved it when they got into the playoffs and they beat some good teams. And kudos to Coach Lytle and them. I was rooting for them being an SEC team. Rooting for Hill House definitely. But I do think in Division I, you could ask any of the Division I coaches. I think that they'd be totally misled to think that the rough schedule does not affect you as the season goes on. I think all of us would agree out of the 7 or 8 teams in Division I that it was a very, very rough year.
Right. You mentioned earlier, as you get older, coaching, it becomes a grind, especially with teaching. A good friend of yours is still coaching, Johnny Oko, and I would say he's probably 64, 65 years old. He's still a head coach. Does there come a point for you personally where you say, you know what, I'm going to step aside because, I'm getting older and I just don't have it in me to come to practice every day anymore?
It might come. It hasn't come yet.
So that you still have the love for it.
No doubt. And I understand John. John's a great guy, great man. And John loves coaching kids.
Right.
And I don't think with John, it matters where he coaches, as long as it's a place that's a fit for him.
Right.
And I can't speak for John, but I know that John is a good person, and he's a good man, a good coach. And again, I think no matter where it is, as long as he feels that he's a fit at that place, John will be coaching. And I think it's something that he truly enjoys.
Right. Let me ask you, Coach Roberts talked to me about this yesterday. Granted, he coached his son, and that's always a great honor. But he said one of the proudest things was coaching AYF, being able to coach his kid. Would you ever coach, say, Pop Warner, flag football, or AYF down the road, like step aside from high school and kind of coach a younger group and try to get them ready for the next level?
I would say never. I did coach the one year I took a break in between Derby and Wilbur Cross. I coached my son in 2004
Right.
at the flag football league in Shelton.
Right.
Yeah, and to me, that was a great experience, and we were not good.
Right.
I'll never forget the Chiefs head coach Bob Roller, assistant coach Ron Luneau, and I remember telling them that guys, we're trying to win one here, and that we won our last game of the year.
First win.
For the first win,
Right.
and it was fun. It was fun,
Right.
Again, I'll never say no to that either. But
Right. Would you ever go back to being a head coach on the varsity level football?
for football, right now my answer would be no.
No,
It's
right.
because now the job is 12 months.
Right.
It's 12 months.
Do you
and
agree
it's-
with that? Do you think it needs to be 12 months? I mean, do you think they could do it the way they used to do it, or is it a necessity now that it has to be?
I think that the competitiveness to be the best has made it that way. And I think that it is a 12-month job, whether you like it or not.
Right.
And to me, I enjoy sports and kids too much. I don't want to be, for 12 months, I don't want to be involved in one thing.
Right.
I like going, and as crazy as it sounds, I love going to Gettysburg in July and
Right.
visiting that battlefield every year like I've been for the last 15 years. I love going to Columbia and taking courses. I love going out and spending my summers. I'll be going up tomorrow to see the Bunker Hill Memorial, the
Oh,
monument
nice.
up in
Right.
Boston.
Yeah.
I took one day, Columbus Day, that we had off from school. I went up and saw Lexington and Concord.
Wow.
And again, I'm seeing these places that I'm teaching about, and to me, that's very important. That's very important.
Is there one lesson that you really like to teach, and like what one do you enjoy teaching to your students the most? You mentioned Gettysburg, things like that, but what is the one event that's happened in history that you love teaching each and every year when you teach your students?
I would say my favorite lessons are involved with the Civil War.
Right.
The causes of and the battles of the Civil War. And to me, anything with the Civil War is awesome to
Right.
me. I love talking about immigration. I love talking about cultures and backgrounds and how cities like New Haven and Derby and Ansonia and Bridgeport had their ethnic neighborhoods, and they had their neighborhoods where people settled and then they worked in the factories. And so to me, that type of stuff, that part of history is what I love.
What's the toughest part about, preparing to give them a test or an exam? What is the toughest part for you as a teacher when you're going over that? Okay, what questions am I going to put in? What, essays, whatever it might be. What is the toughest thing for you when you're doing that stuff?
Well, you just want to make sure that the kids have been exposed to what questions you're going to ask them. You don't want to
Right.
ask them something that that you didn't cover with them in class.
Right.
So you want to make sure that you're fair with them when you're giving them that test.
Right. One of the things I wanted to do before you left is you have to have a good John D story for the people out here, because, I've talked to Steve Riley. He gives me a lot on the air and a lot off the air, but could you give me one John D story that stands out to you?
There were many, and there's a couple that I can't really talk about on
Right.
the air
Right.
because they're so personal and they're funny. But John D to me is definitely. All I know is this is one of the stories that'll stick out is one of the last times we coached together was with Guilford American Legion.
Right.
And we had just been ousted in the quarterfinals up in Torrington, and we had been together for about 40 straight days between coaching and making the playoffs, and we had our Guilford uniforms on, and we're driving down Route 8, and he said, Ron, he goes, our wives won't know that we got beat. And he said, is there a way we could, tell them we'll put the uniforms on tomorrow and we'll tell them that we have a game, but we'll just drive around the state and talk about things, and we'll go visit a hot dog joint or a hamburger joint. And I looked at him and I said, D, the summer's over. And I said, it was good for the last 40 days, D, but I've had enough of you right now. So it was great. He wanted to spend another couple days just shooting the crap and going out there and hanging out, which was fun. But I have a lot of other stories in private that I can mention about John D. that are hilarious. And he truly is one of the best characters, one of the best baseball coaches that I've been around.
Right. And, I'm pretty sure he gave it a nickname, Newt. I could be wrong, but I definitely think he was the one who gave it to you. And I remember you telling a story one time. You guys were at a pizza place, and you're waiting for the pizza to be served, and he's just yelling out Newt, Newt as loud as he could. So, he didn't care where he was.
Yeah.
That was John D. all the time.
Yeah.
But, a lot of people don't realize, though, very good baseball coach. He really was a great baseball coach.
Well, he's such a character that kids enjoy playing for him. And when you enjoy playing for somebody, you tend to play harder and you get more focused. And I have to correct you, though. The nickname Newt was given to me by a buddy of mine that I played college football with named Hubert Paris.
Oh, okay.
Hubert was from New Rochelle, New York.
Right.
And he gave me that nickname in the locker room my freshman year at Central Connecticut, and then it just stuck. And there was enough Derby kids up at Central that picked up on it, and then they brought it back. It was just after high school that I was given that nickname.
Right. You've been teaching now for over 25 years. You've been coaching for over 25 years. It's hard to, just pick one. But what is your most memorable thing about either one that stands out? Is there one that stands out to you the most where, it was like a great moment for you? Do you have one, or are there many?
I have a lot, but lately one of the greatest ones was being part of the staff at West Haven when Eddie McCarthy broke the record for wins.
Right.
It was at Hamden. It was a big win for us, and just being part of that, history.
Right.
Was great. Coaching with Coach McCarthy, coaching with Rich Boucher and Timmy Nixon and other guys from West Haven that are really, really big parts of that community. And, being there with our athletic director, John Capone, and who's a great man. And it's just, to me, one of those things where that was a great memory.
Right.
Winning the state championship at West Haven in baseball, my very first year there, was a great memory. Beating Ansonia that year we talked about in '96.
Right.
Those were just some of the best memories that I had. Yeah.
Right. Before we go, Coach, what does Ron Luneau want to be remembered for the most? Whether it's teaching, coaching, a person, whatever. When you look back and your career comes to an end and you're retired, what do you want to be remembered for the most?
I just want to be remembered as a teacher and a coach who did the most they could for their students and his players. And I would hope that my players all enjoyed playing for me. I think that they know that I've always laid it out on the line for them, and I want to be remembered just as a person who did the most they could for his students and for his players.
Well, Coach, I really appreciate this. This was an honor, and it was a lot of fun, and I could keep going, but we're out of time. But I really want to thank you for coming on today. And just for me personally, what you did for me over the years, I'm forever grateful, and I'll never forget it. And thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Well, there you have it, folks. It started out as a young kid growing up in Derby. As time went on, he became a very good football player for Derby, and then took his education to the next level at Central Connecticut. He would return to Derby in '92, this time as an educator, also a coach. He's had many great moments in his career, but the thing that stands out the most to Coach Luneau is the relationship he's had with his students and the bond he's had with his players and the effort he's gotten out of them. When you first meet him, you don't know who he is because you're just meeting him, but he takes the time to make sure he knows who you are. He learns your name. And every time you walk into that hallway or walk into that field or walk on that court, one thing even if you're walking in a grocery store, you know that Mr. Luneau is going to know who you are. Heroes come and go in your life, but if you're lucky, the good ones stick around for the long haul. I can't tell you many things when I was in high school that I can remember, but the one thing I can tell you is I remember what Mr. Luneau did for me and every student that he taught. If the legacy of a man is based on the lives he's touched and the people he's loved, then the legacy of Ron Luneau will live on forever. For Hometown Heroes, I'm Mike Kenichi saying, good night, everyone.